Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this evening's Urban Planning Committee meeting for the 24th of August. And thank you for your patience for those at home and those members that have been waiting patiently in the gallery. In recognising the cultural diversity of our great city, I pay my respects to the local Indigenous people of Moreland by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. Offer my respects to the Wurundjeri elders, past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Members of the gallery, please note this urban planning meeting is being recorded and web streamed live to Council's website. This recording will be available as video on demand. The gallery attendees are advised that they may be recorded during the meeting. Councillors and officers in attendance tonight. Councillors in attendance, Councillor Megan Hopper, Councillor John Kavanagh,
Good evening.
Helen Davidson, the Chair, Councillor Lambros Tapanos, Councillor Rob Thompson. The officers in attendance tonight are Group Manager of City Development, Philip Priest, Planning Coordinator, Darren Camilleri, Planning Coordinator, Mark Hughes, Principal Urban Planner, Lauren Lees, Principal Urban Planner, Megan Merritt, and Governance Officer, Saskia Hunter. And do we have any apologies for this evening?
I received a text message apology from Councillor Lita Gillies on the way here.
Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Tapanos. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried.
Reason I voted against, should have done it through the chair or through the group manager. That's
correct. Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Can I have an adoption for the minutes for the meeting held on the 27th of July 2016? Moved by Councillor Kavanagh. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Rob Thompson. All those in favour? I declare that carried. And now we'll move on to a brief introduction of how this evening's meeting will run. The relevant planner will introduce the report and the officer's recommendations. I'll then give the objectors an opportunity to move to the lectern in front of us to make their submission. After this time, the applicant will be given an opportunity to speak. If you're making a submission this evening, please state your name and address clearly for the record. You're requested to present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what other speakers have said and keep the discussion focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to the planning application, please inform the committee why you are opposed and suggest an alternative approach that would satisfy your concerns. Please use the opportunity to focus on your concerns rather than matters of detail in the officer's report. And I note there is a time limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, but as chairperson, I reserve the right to increase or decrease that time available. And we'll now move on to the presentation of reports. Oh, sorry, I'll just backtrack a bit. Do we have any conflicts of interest to declare? No. Okay. We'll now move on to the presentation of reports. 31 to 37 Stewart Street and 12 to 20 Hardy Street in Brunswick. Planning application MPS 2015-269.
Thank you, councillors. This application pertains to 31 to 37 Stewart Street and 12 to 20 Hardy Street in Brunswick. In this instance, the officer's recommendation to the Urban Planning Committee is that council submit to VCAT that the application be refused at an upcoming hearing. This is a large site of approximately 8,600 square metres and it's approximately 320 metres east of Sydney Road. The site's located within the neighbourhood residential zone and the front portion of the site is subject to a heritage overlay. This proposal involves the partial demolition of the existing industrial buildings on site and the construction of dwellings with a reduction of the car parking requirement. Initially, the application was lodged with a different set of plans and was refused without advertising on the basis that the information provided was vastly inadequate. The application was lodged prior to the site being rezoned from the general residential zone to the neighbourhood residential zone. As the application was received prior to the rezoning, in this instance, more than 4 dwellings per lot can be considered, and this exception is referred to as transitional provisions. An appeal against council's refusal has been lodged by the applicant and plans have been substituted through the tribunal. The plans that are before the tribunal are the plans which are referred to in this recommendation. A compulsory conference, which is a mediation hearing, will occur this Friday, the 26th of August, and a full hearing is listed for 4 days, commencing the 26th of September 2016. In summary, this application proposes demolition of much of the industrial buildings on site the construction of 75 dwellings of 2 and 3 storeys and of 3 bedrooms. There are 80 car parking spaces proposed on site, 77 residential spaces and 3 visitor spaces. The proposal will create 8 on-street car parking spaces, mostly along Hardy Street. The site will be accessed from Stewart or Hardy Street via a private internal road, and there is a small communal landscaped area of approximately 126 square metres located in the centre of the site. This is a ground floor plan. This is the first floor, and this is the second floor, so the top floor. For some of the dwellings, they are also proposing roof terraces as well. This is a perspective view of the site from Stewart Street, looking towards the north. That's the front of the site. This is the Hardy Street site, looking south towards Stewart Street. And this is the internal road, again looking south towards Stewart Street. In this instance, notice was directed by the tribunal to be given by the permit applicant, and 39 statements of grounds have been received by the tribunal, which are objections, and 7 objector parties have indicated that they will be appearing at the hearing. The grounds of objection largely relate to heritage, character, amenity, landscaping, height, car parking and traffic. Prior to the hearing, officers have encouraged the applicant to continue further discussions with both council and objector parties to achieve an appropriate built form outcome for this site. However, based on the plans before us, it is the officer's recommendation to the UPC that the submission to VCAT be one to not support the current plans based on the grounds contained in page 4 of this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the gallery who wish to speak as an objector to this application? Yes, who'd like to come first? Please come up to the lectern.
Thank you. My name is Judy Dixon. I live at number 2 Connolly Street in Brunswick, and I'm an objector and a party to the proceedings. I want to speak about the process, which is a really large concern to the neighbourhood community. Most of the people, in fact, all the people that I am involved with are understanding that this site needs to be developed. It's a large site, it will be developed. And I think there's a general acceptance that it's an opportunity for something quite exciting, something reflecting the community to be developed. And we would look forward to an involvement in that development. We were quite delighted when council went ahead and zoned that particular area as neighbourhood residential zone. It was appropriate. We congratulate council for doing that. We're very pleased. Which was why we were quite astounded when I, for example, on the 26th of May, received a packet of material from Ratio. This material described an application for construction of 2- and 3-storey buildings comprising 75 dwellings and reduced car parking arrangements. This clearly did not relate to neighbourhood residential zone. We were quite, my neighbour and I discussed it, we were quite puzzled. It was on the Thursday. On the Tuesday, we came, I should mention too, no plans, no pictures, no diagrams, no descriptions were included in that package, nothing. On the Tuesday, we came up to council and we had a look at some plans. They were preliminary plans, they were dated March 2016. And we had a discussion with the planner and we were absolutely stunned and shocked and horrified to hear the process by which this had happened. If I could quickly, I'm not sure of my time, draw an analogy in my professional area, immigration law. If I submitted a visa application which had been submitted 8 years before and had then gone to judicial review, been refused at each stage, and then I resubmitted it, I think the Department of Immigration would very swiftly send it straight back. It certainly would never be accepted as lodged. it would never be accepted as a valid application to be considered and to be worked upon. And that's what I find so appalling about this process, so horrifying. And I would have to say, we're moving now into the area of natural justice, and I firmly believe that we have lost all sense of procedural fairness in this process. There's been no procedural fairness for the community at all. We knew nothing of what was happening. The community was never consulted.
Judy, could I just ask that you wind up your points from here?
Wind up?
Wind up your points, yes.
Oh,
We're just running out
okay.
of time.
Well, the community was never consulted. I repeat, we did not have any procedural fairness. I think this has to happen. There has to be fairness in the process as well as the outcome. If there's no fairness in the process, the community will never accept the outcome. There will be anger and resentment. You have only had 39 objections. And you know why? Because people simply didn't know that this was happening. And secondly, even if they knew this area was neighbourhood residential zone, so they trusted council that what was being proposed would be a reasonable proposal. So we're asking you, please try and get this into neighbourhood residential zone if you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Is there another? Yes, please come forward.
Hi, thanks for your time. My name is Vanessa Lowry. I'm from 19 Hardy Street, Brunswick. I'm directly impacted by this development. I live across the road. However, I didn't receive any notification of the proposal. I found out when some kind-hearted neighbours dropped a note in my mailbox. There wasn't a poster on the wall where I live, which is across the road from the warehouses that are there currently. And I had to submit my statement of grounds in one business day. That was the notice I received. To cover briefly my concerns with the proposal, one is the height and density for the area. The street I live is on Hardy Street. Most houses are single-storey, single-fronted. Blocks are small. The roads, most houses don't have off-street parking. So most parking is on the street, and therefore traffic is reduced to one lane. And the same is the same for Stewart Street, where there's also a supermarket at the end, so that's quite a busy street already given its size. So height and density, overlooking, overshadowing. Already there's some shadow cast by the warehouses across the road. Being an old area, there's limited natural light in the houses. My house is particularly dark, and I think adding this extra height in an area that's not meant to approve that would just exacerbate the problem and make the area even darker. As I mentioned, traffic and parking is a concern. I pay for a parking permit every year, but the street's already not well monitored, with people overstaying the 2-hour limit because of the warehouses. I find this proposed 3 visitor parking ridiculous for the number of units. I can't fathom how we could have an extra 75 cars going down those streets every day when it's already quite tight, and insurance premiums are high because we're all parking on the street, so no doubt they'll be impacted because cars will be hit. There's also a lot of pets, cats. Hardy Street is a very cat dense neighbourhood, and they're often sitting on the roads, and there have been occasions, sadly, where my neighbours' cats have been hit by cars, and I can only be concerned that this would become an exacerbated problem with the increased traffic in the area. I have concerns around noise. There's already a bit of noise from the warehouses, but we've come to a happy medium in our living coexisting arrangement. I'm concerned, again, traffic and the increased population of what this would mean. Most houses are weatherboard, uninsulated, they're over 100 years old, and no doubt noise will be a problem. And lastly, it comes down to aesthetics, and yes, I chose the area because of its Victorian nature, and this is not in keeping in the neighbourhood. There aren't any developments of this size in close proximity, and there's a reason for that. So I think it needs to be sympathetic to the neighbourhood, and I think the community would love to be involved in a proper consulting process to do this development well. I'm excited about the potential of developing the site, but not about this process or what's been proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another speaker who wishes to come forward?
Yes. Hello, my name is Susan Russo-Robertson and I live at 20 Connolly Street in Brunswick. And I'd just like to thank you for giving me an opportunity to have a voice here, because I actually have some diagrams here that I'd like to pass out.
Yep.
I was given no notification, and you can see by these dots I'm at number 20, and there's no dot on there. Not only in my house, but also other neighbours as well. So we were given no notification. And this really concerns me as a resident, and with such a huge development that is occurring, I've been given no time for this. This is a concern. If this is the way we're going to be treated as residents in this community, this is a concern. My other thing is that I have concern about the 3 stories, about the bulk. At the back of my house, which is a sanctuary, a beautiful garden. Living in Brunswick, it's a very busy place, and we really love our quiet spaces. When I walk out of my backyard, I walk out of my back door, I will be looking up to over 12 metres. Not only will I not be just seeing a townhouse, but I will actually be seeing a wall. We will all be seeing a wall. And I will feel like I'm living in a bunker. So that really concerns me with the designing. It's not only with the visual bulk of my house, but it's buildings from 16 to 22, 24 and 26, all the way along. We are at the back. So I see the photos that you have seen here of near Stewart Street, Hardy Street, but we are at the back and we are the main bulk. And it's just design-wise, I'm surprised, because I'm thinking in Brunswick we're innovative, and this is not innovative. The overshadowing, I have another diagram here. This is actually the overshadowing at 9 a.m. in the morning. This was the overshadowing that was sent.
Is this, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Was this on the Equinox, this one, or was this at the smallest?
The Equinox.
Yes.
Equinox,
So
okay.
this just makes no sense.
Yeah.
This was a diagram that was given to me by a neighbour who was informed, and we were completely surprised when we actually had this redone, and so that's another issue. Not only do I have concern because of the sanctuary of our backyards, we all deserve light. We will have no light. Not only is that a concern for me, because I breakfast out in my backyard, I don't know if anybody else does, but I do, and I like sunshine. The other thing that concerns me is that the townhouses, the houses that are built 3 metres from our fence, this huge bulk, these houses will have no light till about 12 o'clock. So the developer, the designers have designed us so close to us that when the light that they will get will not be until quite later in the day. And I don't know about you, but I feel concerned for these residents. I feel really concerned for them, that whoever buys that, they will have in their backyard darkness till about lunchtime. It's not acceptable, not acceptable. The other thing is that we in Brunswick, we in a city, people in this area, we're a community. We were just talking as we were arriving here today how someone fixed someone else's fence. You know, we have grace and consideration and respect for each other, and we would like the same, not only from being informed, but also from the design. And we know that there are going to be changes, and we support good design. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Is there another speaker who wishes to come forward?
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. Firstly, I would like to say I'm Kelvin. I'm from Jones Street. I really appreciate this time to present to the committee, and also I appreciate a lot of hard work has gone into addressing a plan that is significantly substandard. We are all volunteers. We have just recently accessed the Urban Planning Committee agenda report. While there has been some excellent work done in analysing the plan, we appreciate it. We would like to draw to the attention of the committee some aspects in which we feel have been overlooked. A few of us have got together and done a detailed review that myself, Joe and some of the others, Joe has emailed in advance of this a report to all of yourselves and also to the Mayor. What I'd like to do is with permission
Yes,
approach. Please. Okay. Second. First one. Should I hand it to you or just hand it across?
Yeah, we can spread it out. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you,
So
mate.
what this is a simple code in writing, which is
This is the email that we received?
So this is the 4-page report. There's a follow-up, which was a motion, which I will hand, which basically summarises this, because we greatly appreciate the time to respond to and address each of the points internally. The bottom line of this document is that we're pleading for the council to actually apply the zoning that applies in this area. Also, with regard to that, I've also given on here, just briefly hand out some motions that we would greatly appreciate worked by our councillor, Living Hoppler, or by the chair, as is appropriate. The purpose of these motions is effectively summarising the bottom line out of this document, which I've just handed out, which is also emailed in. We do understand that our report was provided only a while ago. It's just, we've only just received the Urban Planning Committee report on Monday and we had to do a lot of work to analyse it. Okay, the bottom line is this. We love what our streets represent, which is a single story, strong neighbourhood character, Federation of Victorian styles, beautiful private backyards. They currently have no overlooking from second or third story decks anywhere in this area, anywhere. The neighbourhood character was so strongly understood that when, unfortunately, a few years ago, a proposal from one resident to put a 3-story deck was put forward to VCAT, it was knocked out. That should provide, that was under the old zoning, not under the neighbourhood residential zone, which is even more restrictive. So I think that should set a fairly clear precedent example at VCAT that under the old zoning, 3rd-storey decks were seen as completely unacceptable in this neighbourhood because they are invasive, they provided overlook into people's backyards, they were often inadequately screened, 70% screen anyone can look through. The proposals for screening here are totally inadequate. You could look over the top of it. Most adults could look straight over the top, so the screening proposals are inadequate. So what we're requesting is recognition of just a simple right that we all love in our suburb, which is the right to have privacy in our backyards, free from a looming 12-storey wall and 4th-storey decking. I mean, seriously. With privacy screens, you can look straight through or look straight over. It's simply not acceptable, I think, to everyone here. In terms of the motions now, we are greatly appreciating the planner's work and the recommendation to reject this, but we want the recommendation to reject it to have stronger reasons to go to VCAT. That's why we're putting forward the proposal in these motions that are in this list. We're requesting that the Moreland City Council stand up for the neighbourhood residential zone by effectively stating that the 8-metre neighbourhood residential zone should apply because this plan set was submitted after it came into effect. This plan set is a new set that is a complete departure from what was proposed. They proposed 4-storey apartments going all over the block, including blocks that are now no longer in consideration. Now they're proposing 4-storey units and no underground car parking. Like, they have jumped from one design to a completely new design. And this new design was only submitted because of the good work of council rejecting the completely inadequate old design. So the bottom line is the neighbourhood residential zone came in 2015. This plan set came in 2016. It's very, 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 very simple and obvious to all of us here that that means that the neighbourhood residential zone should be applied. So I suppose I'll run through the motions briefly. Motion 1 that we're requesting is that the recommendation be added to the motion that the planner has already put, that the 8 metre neighbourhood residential height limit should apply to this site, put purely and simply because it is in that zone. The second motion is that recommendation be added to the resolution of this Urban Planning Committee that a 2-storey at property boundary limit should apply to this site because that is the limit that is applicable under clause 20.01 of the Moreland Planning Scheme for areas that are in the neighbourhood residential zone and even areas in the general residential zone, and even under the old neighbourhood character policy that was previously applying, that we're transitioning out of into the new zone, 2-storey limits in a 1-storey neighbourhood. This is a 1-storey neighbourhood. Seriously, aside from just a few infill developments, which are rare and unusual, all of the people in Connolly Street and all of the people in Harding Street are 1-storey facing 3 to 4 stories, looming up to 12 metres.
Calvin, could you summarise the following points?
So that's motion 2. Motion 3 is a recommendation be added that basically to meet the neighbourhood character and privacy protection clauses, which are basically detailed in the paper, clause 55.4 to 6, overlooking standard B12, that says you should not be able to overlook from within 9 metres into private open space or another person's window. This building, because it is built 12-metre walls, 3 metres off this back fence, is helicoptering down into almost every backyard in Connolly Street, to the point at which these people will feel they'll have a guard tower over them when they go out there to have their coffee in the morning looking down on them, and they will lose sun in the morning to a ridiculous extent. So recommending the removal of the 3rd and 4th storey decks must be deleted from the plans, and that's motion 3. Motion 4 is recommending to add to your final resolution tonight that extra overlooking protections be provided. That's after we're looking at deleting those 3rd and 4th storey intrusive and overlooking decks, and the details in the motion are there. And motion 5 is recommending that the full car parking for residents and visitors, which is 156 under the statutory requirement parking clause 52.6, be provided because all of the streets surrounding this development are already parked out any given night. I know this as a resident from living in the area over 10 years as a cyclist and a car driver. Often I will find coming back into Connolly Street, you'll be lucky if there's one park available after 7 or 8 o'clock at night, one spare park. Harding Street, you'll be lucky to have any parking. The streets heading south from Stewart Street, you'll be lucky to have any parking whatsoever. So if there is
Calvin,
2
you're going
spare
to have to
parks,
wind up now.
okay, so thank you very much for your time to present. We greatly appreciate the good work that Moreland Council is doing. We ask that you show very strong support for the residents and for the planning scheme and the protections we all deserve by supporting these motions, and we ask that they be voted on individually so we can understand where the councillors stand on motion by motion, not as a block, just in case there's one motion that there is an issue with, so we can understand that, which motions you're supporting and that you vote on them individually at the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Is there another speaker in relation? Yes, please come forward.
Hi councillors, my name's Sally McIntyre. I live at 18 Connolly Street. Sometimes I think I live at 20 Connolly Street because on all the plans my house is marked as 20 Connolly Street, and I actually said 20 Connolly Street the other day. I just want to shed some light on why I think we're even considering these amended plans under Res Code from what I've unearthed. And I'm going to say why it's unearthed because I want to show you the plans. Okay, they weren't circulated to us. It took me 3 trips up to council to get the plans after I clicked that something was happening. They were never circulated by the applicant to anybody, and we're lucky if we saw anything that wasn't over the shoulder of someone else who lent them to us for a short period of time. So what I think has happened is, and I was here in 2004, for the first time this application went to both council and was rejected by council and VCAT. In 2008, it was before council and also refused by VCAT. These plans that were lodged in 2015, a month before the neighbourhood residential zone came in, were actually identical to the plans or essentially the same plans that had been rejected by VCAT and yourselves in 2008. Understandably, they were accepted by council. Council had a certain amount of time to get to the plans to assess them, and needed to be aware that these were plans that were actually not legitimate, had no real chance of success. Council, naturally, Planning Department asked for requested further information, unfortunately, according to the applicant, not within the appropriate period of time. In not putting the request for information out in the appropriate period of time, it looks like council was unable to lapse the application, which is probably what essentially should have happened. Why was the applicant unable to furnish council with any real accessible plans for the whole of 2015? And it suggests to me that perhaps they weren't ready, had no real application to put in. So why would they do that in March with the neighbourhood residential zones coming in April? I would say that that is to gain the advantage of the transitional provisions and allow them to be assessed under Res Code rather than the neighbourhood residential zone. I'm sure you're all aware of that, but we're just piecing it together. Now, even so, under Res Code, this application and the plans that we're currently looking at push Res Code and exceed even Res Code. In the site, I think the site coverage is over Res Code. The behind my building at 18 Connolly Street, I'm sorry, I get this. We're a predominantly single storey, and I'm looking at that. I have 3 townhouses behind me, and like my neighbour behind, I have a beautiful backyard. We have our breakfast in the backyard. We will be floored by what we see when we walk out. You will destroy our backyard if you let that happen on my thing. So that here we come back to the flawed process again. Okay, so this is in the Moreland officer's report. These are the objectives. Okay, the only reason that they're on here is because our neighbourhood and our community advised them. This map, this site map here, I would say was drawn from the applicant's own site titles, which I can't find anything other than this one, which is not the full extent of the site. I don't think there's 3 lots, I think there's 4. I can't count. I mean, I'm just struggling with 3 titles to work out what information was actually here. So it's very difficult for us as non-architects and non-planners to piece it together, such a complex thing. The development summary has inaccuracies. There's actually 70 of the 75 apartment buildings are 3-storey, 93% are 3-storey. There's no diversity or very little diversity in developments that are 3-bedroom, 3-storey townhouses. They're not affordable in Brunswick, as you'd well know. The incorrect information in the plans when we finally got them, and I had less than a week to actually get statement of grounds in. I went up the first time, I had to wait and sit while people photocopied the pages I thought I'd need. I went back home and think, well, that doesn't make sense. I'd go back another couple of days and get some more. And then I came back and had a quick meeting with Megan the following week to get the rest of them, which is the same week the statement of grounds had to be on. How I was able to make any sense of it, I don't know. On the architectural statement, these are plans dated from council April, but they weren't the most recent plans at the time. These ones say the area is 8,180 square metres. Apparently it's not. Someone might like to tell me what it is, because on the ratio thing it says 8,760. I don't know, but anyway, this is what I was working with. Measurements on the plans are inaccurate. Some of the lengths are inaccurate. Here in the planner's report, it says that there's a frontage to Hardy Street of 77 metres. I think it's 102. And I've got a scale ruler to show it.
Wind up your main points now.
I think I've finished. Okay. I think what I'd like councillors to do for us is I think you need to relieve the impact on Connolly Street, please. We think we'd like you to strengthen that response. We think we've been seriously overlooked.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there another speaker who wishes to come forward? Yes?
Hi, my name is Melissa Cameron. I live with my husband and our 2 daughters at 22 Connolly Street, which is 24 Connolly Street on the plans. We definitely live at 22 Connolly Street though. I spoke to Megan last year and I was made aware that plans had come in again because we knew they were going to come in again, and she assured me that we'd be notified if something was to happen. We weren't notified at all. Okay, so we back onto it. Like when I walk out my back door now, I'm going to have a 12.5 metre thing in like 3 metres from our backyard. We weren't notified. We didn't get any plans. I had 24 hours to make a response to VCAT, and I cannot understand how we could put in the decision. Like I might have not even known. Like if my neighbours hadn't told me, I'd just come home one day and they'd be like, you know, it's all on. Now, looking at the plans, what just amazes me is we're encouraging sort of ground story living, so indoor, outdoor living. All of these places, you walk in or you walk through the gate at the front into the place. So you drive in through your roller door into your garage, you enter your house through your garage. There's no, you know, you don't meet the neighbours or anything. It sort of leads you to believe it's a security issue because everything's gated. You walk in, you go upstairs. There's no access to outside from ground story. The backyards are tiny. They'll be totally in shadow. Like the space, I can see the space in my backyard where their backyard's going to be. Nothing is going to grow there. They're kidding themselves. I mean, there's an easement there to start with, which nothing will grow on, and there's this blackness. So I'm astounded, and I really don't understand how it slipped through council to allow them to submit plans which they were never considering doing anyway, and not have to come back to the process of council before they went to VCAT. That's the thing that bothers me the most. Because this is not the way the process is supposed to happen. We're not supposed to spend weeks and weeks trying to figure this out and have to go to VCAT, you know, based on something that hasn't even been to council. So I suppose one of the big disappointments for me is when we look at this space, I know there's no real heritage sort of listing or anything on it, but it's these beautiful big brick buildings. And you see other developments in Brunswick where they utilise these buildings and create sort of a bit of history. Brunswick with the brickworks. When we look at what the exterior of this thing's going to be, it in no way reflects what we should or expect to see in Brunswick. It's just a waste of a really good space.
Thank you. Yes, please come forward.
I'm Nick Dolby from Holbrook Crescent in West Brunswick, but for 20 years I lived in a number of houses, including 41 Stewart Street, one house away from this development, number 12 Mountfield Street, where I could almost see this development, and then in Leithhead and Barrow Streets, just to the north of this development. I know the site well. One of the things I wish to address three issues. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the refusal to approve of it based upon the pedestrian access. I think that is a very good reason to refuse this application. However, I am concerned about heritage, in particular the heritage walls along Hardy Street. Hardy Street, both from number 12 down to number 18 Hardy Street, have 1920s, 30s warehouses there, and in this development at the very corner of Hardy Street there are also walls of similar age. I would like to see any development on this site constrained by that built environment, constrained so that it mimics the present day industrial heritage nature of the west side of Hardy Street. I believe they're retaining the 2-storey heritage walls on Hardy Street in this application, but not the 1-storey wall. No, we're not sure because their plans are dodgy. Okay. All right. So I've addressed the heritage concerns. My other concern is roof gardens. People mentioned overlooking. I lived at 41 Stewart Street, a 2-storey Victorian brick terrace building. And yes, I could see my next door neighbour's backyard. Yes, I could see across the laneway to their backyard. I could see those next door neighbours' backyard. I currently live in West Brunswick where, because I live on the slope of a hill, 3 of my neighbours in their 1-storey houses can look into my backyard. When I lived in Leithhead Street, our low fence meant that our neighbour and us could share stories over the back fence. Looking into people's backyards It's not that big a deal, folks. But roof gardens, we live in a Mediterranean climate. Around the Mediterranean, do we see pitched roofs? No, pitched roofs are a northern European thing because of things like snow and high rainfall. Around the Mediterranean, we have flat roofs. Why? Because it's actually more heat. It attracts less heat. It builds up heat less. It means you can use that roof space as a living space. So instead of having a useless pitched roof that in fact heats up more during extreme hot days than a flat roof, why don't we have flat roofs? Why don't we have roof gardens which may ameliorate urban heat island effects? Why don't we have roof gardens where people have additional living space? I'd like council, in fact, to perhaps look at this issue of pitched versus flat roofs, to look at roof gardens, particularly for their ecological and extreme climate event reducing effects. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Is there another speaker who wishes to come forward? Is there a representative for the applicant present? Yes, please come forward.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name's Greg Tobin. I'm representing the applicant tonight. The committee will be aware that this is a matter that is currently before the tribunal, and it's this Friday that we'll be attending a compulsory conference at the tribunal. Now, we've got the grounds of those parties, and you've heard from a number of them tonight expressing their concerns. We've also now, for the last 2 weeks, had a feeling for the council's appraisal of the development. And since that time, the time hasn't been wasted. We've been working to try and address and develop some plans that respond to the concerns that have been expressed. So on Friday at the compulsory conference, we'll table plans, and I just really wanted to summarise for the council the nature of the sort of changes that we're proposing to put forward this week. So the plans that are before you for determination tonight describe approximately, I think, or exactly 75 dwellings. The plans that will be tabled on Friday will include 62 dwellings, or perhaps a few less. We're still finalising those plans. The application plans, and we've heard a number of concerns expressed by residents upon Connolly Street whose houses back on to the subject site. The application plans had 22 three-storey dwellings across those Connolly Street fronting houses. The current plans have 4 three-storey dwellings, so a reduction of 18 three-storey dwellings across that area. There's been a concern raised about a block and this appearing as a block, so there's quite a few changes to sort of recess buildings that we would put on the table as a mediating ground, and also some breaks in the built form altogether, so the 2 blocks that come near Connolly Street would be divided into 4 blocks. There are changes to the Stewart Street frontage that we would propose, deletion within Hardy Street to create a pedestrian walkway, a point that I noted was picked up today into the site, and the park, which I think was described as 120 something metres to you earlier this evening, expanded to something over 500 metres. So I wanted to put that to you this evening. This applicant hasn't been sitting idle while people have been expressing concerns with the design. They're working. We're looking forward to the opportunity to meet with the objecting parties on Friday. Indeed, I'll be hanging around this evening if people want to come and start those discussions tonight. We'd ask that in passing your resolution, if you determine to follow the officer's recommendation, that you give the officers the delegated authority to reach an in-principle position with us based on the plans that we're going to present at the mediation on Friday, or at the compulsory conference on Friday. That would, of course, need to come back to the council. We understand that. But that's the position that we'd like to put this evening.
Sorry.
Definitely worth a try.
I'm ready
Have you
to.
finished?
I believe
Sorry.
Councillor
Have you
Kavanagh.
finished?
Yes, I have, thank
Can
you.
I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, of course you
Okay.
can.
Were you working for the applicant in 2008 at the...
No, I wasn't.
Right. So you've spoken about how a lot of work's gone on, but it seems like nothing went on between 2008 and 2015. Am I correct?
Look, I really can't speak to that period of time. I was engaged by this applicant in about May of this year. So
Can I ask about this period then? All right,
Yeah, of
because
course.
I understand you were engaged in. Can I ask? We talked about the residents have talked a lot about process, and I think they've made some very valid points. Do you think the process is right that tonight they learn that there's a reduction in dwellings, that tonight they learn that there's less street frontage, etc.? Do you think that's fair and reasonable?
I think you've got to understand that what would ordinarily happen in the context of a compulsory conference is that people would attend the conference and then things would be put out at that conference rather than in advance. We're here tonight to sort of try and meet some of the people tonight so that we can talk to them about the changes we're proposing and start that discussion now. So we've had 2 weeks with the decision of the officers, or a little bit less in fact, and we're trying to disseminate that combined with the objections to achieve a positive result on a site that's a real opportunity site.
Just before you go, can I ask the officer? Can I ask the officer?
No, sorry, there's no more comments from the gallery at this
okay.
point.
No, just a comment is made and the question is asked. Rachel was the
that's
same
okay.
company back in 2008
Okay.
that put the plans in. This person's
Councillor
not here.
Tapanos? I think Councillor Tapanos.
Can I ask a question as well of the applicant? So the VCAT order dated 10th March instructed you to undertake advertising to the community?
That's 10th of March, I think, around that time.
And what
yes.
type of advertising did occur? Because I'm hearing from residents today that a lot of people didn't receive that notification and haven't really been informed of this application, haven't had an opportunity to be an objector.
Yeah. As I understand, the advertising was handled by the planning consultancy who was managing the application. What the process was that they asked officers for the details of who they would require advertising to. That then was provided to us and we came to the tribunal to say, well, here's the list that we've got from the council. Now, I'm not sure where I think it's 2 or 3 properties that didn't get notice. I'm not sure. Well, 2 or 3, as I understand it, the 2 or 3 properties abutting the site that didn't get notice. I'm not sure where that occurred. My advice from the consultancy is that they affected the advertising to the addresses they were given.
Councillor Kavanagh?
I have nothing for the applicant, but I do have a couple of questions for the officer. Does anyone have anything else for the applicant? Can I ask the group manager just about the process? So am I correct in assuming that from 2008 to 2015, the applicant put in identical plans or almost identical plans in 2015, just before the closure of the changeover of zonings, and then there's no expectation on the applicant to have taken anything into account from the 2008 VCAT decision prior to putting in those plans? They're allowed to put in almost identical plans?
There's nothing in terms of council's handling of the application when it's submitted that provides a basis for council to reject the application because it's an identical application. I think that would come down to reject the application from being lodged.
Yeah.
That comes down to then the assessment of that application, and ultimately, in this scenario, it'll be the assessment by VCAT, noting though that the plans are now substantially different from what was lodged with council.
Now, if the plans vary by such a degree that council, just on those plans, believes that they are entitled to support, all right, does that mean that they've basically got another go at the growth zone rather than the neighbourhood zone? You know, do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
I think so. I think if I can answer it in this way, there is a valid application that's been lodged with council.
Yeah.
There is then an ability for the applicant to have the matter reviewed before VCAT.
Yeah.
And the decision on the substitution of the plans rests with VCAT.
Right.
So there are a set of plans that have been substituted at this point, and there's been notification with some questions around that notification that sits with VCAT as well, not council. And there's the ability again through the compulsory conference situation for further revisions to be made to those plans. I don't know if that completely
No, I think it probably does.
question.
I think you're right. Now, just one more about the notification. Okay, I know we're convinced there was advertising on the site.
I might ask the officers, because I understand that the concerns that have been raised tonight with the committee have also been raised with VCAT.
Okay.
And I think Mark, who's sort of distracted at the moment, but Mark, through the chair, if it's possible to give your understanding of the questions that have been raised with VCAT around the notification or the inadequacies or not,
Sure.
have been raised with VCAT, and VCAT's responded in relation to those questions.
That's correct. My understanding is we've received an email from VCAT, I think it might have been Monday this week, advising that they're satisfied with the extent of notice, and VCAT's got the jurisdiction in terms of it's their process, their decision maker, and the advice we've got from VCAT is they're satisfied.
Thank you.
Now that may be, if I can just add to that may be because that, as we've heard tonight, the properties that weren't notified or have expressed that they weren't notified have now put in grounds to VCAT or are aware of the hearing. That may be one of the reasons that VCAT's satisfied. I don't know those particular facts as to what informed that decision.
Councillor,
I have a question.
Councillor Tapkins?
Yeah, along the same lines, to officers, and so Mark has just run out about it, but the ability to offer an application that has been amended, transitional provisions, is that a decision for council or for VCAT? And is there an ability on such an application, considering it's been amended so significantly, and from what I hear, about to be amended again, is there an opportunity to not offer those provisional, those provisions that relate to transitional clauses? And would that be council's job or would that be VCAT's?
There are circumstances where if an application changes to such a significant degree, then matters of whether the application has been transformed become part of the considerations before VCAT. I think where we are on this particular matter, though, is that there has been substituted plans with VCAT, which have now been accepted and have now gone through our notification process. Those plans then form part of that VCAT proceeding. If there are further changes to those plans, there is always that question of, is there a transformation? We don't have those plans before us at this stage. The applicant is familiar with those arguments. They may wish to respond in terms of the likelihood that that VCAT may see this as a transformation, if that's the question.
I would assist you, Councillor. I'm happy to.
Will assist
I don't
you?
want to speak out of turn.
But I think there'll be no harm in getting your opinion on that, although I know it's probably an opinion that is a decision will be made by the tribunal chair.
That's right.
For the tribunal.
That's right.
It is ultimately a matter for the tribunal.
Councillor Hopper?
Thank you. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 4 with the addition of an additional dot point 5. Whilst acknowledging that transitional provisions do appear to apply, Urban Planning Committee reiterates its strong preference that developments in this area reflect the standards of the neighbourhood residential zone now in effect. Now, a second, I'll speak.
I'm happy to second, but I was going to suggest that maybe something along the lines like this
Yes, please.
be included. That council believes VCAT used its discretion to not afford the application's transitional provisions because of the significant differences between the original plans and the amended plans. These changes be considered transformational. The amended plans be considered a new application and be subject to notification.
Is that satisfactory?
Yes, I'd be happy for that to form dot point 5 and then turn my dot point 5 into a dot point 6 so that you're covering your bases.
Yes.
Make sure you get the wording to the governance officer. Is that still amenable to the seconder as well?
I think Councillor
Seconding it with that amendment. Okay. So in speaking to this, I'd like to thank the resident who made the very salient point about the timing of the application and the impending enforcement of a neighbourhood residential zone. I don't think that that point was lost on any of us here in the council chamber this evening. And I think the response to the suggestion that hard work has been done over the past 2 weeks to amend this application to suit the needs of the residents, the response that we heard in the gallery was probably fairly appropriate. We've had 2 weeks worth of working to respond to concern. I can't speak to or vote on plans I haven't seen. You can't respond to plans you haven't seen. And this application has been in train since 2004. So if you've had 12 years to amend plans and you suddenly decided to do it in the last 2 weeks, then quite frankly, that's not very responsive to resident concerns, in my opinion. I wanted to explain the transitional provisions because there was some concern amongst people who submitted this evening that it was council that sort of hadn't been considerate enough around the neighbourhood residential zone and enforcing that. Council seeks very strongly to enforce the neighbourhood residential zone, which is why I've added that additional point, just to make that very clear that the neighbourhood residential zone is of utmost concern to us and we do want to see that applied. Unfortunately, when there is a case like this where the timing has been doctored in such a way that there is a transitional provision, sometimes it is then out of our hands. But between the amendment that Councillor Tapanos has added and the additional point that I've added, hopefully that point will be made very strongly to VCAT that we do expect the neighbourhood residential zone to come into consideration in this decision making, although from a legal black and white perspective it may not apply in this particular circumstance. This rejection tonight recognises that the proposal totally fails to acknowledge the neighbourhood character and the heritage overlay that exists in this part of Brunswick. And I feel that sometimes we do have applicants coming to us and feeling like Brunswick is all one thing and there is one overarching quality that applies to all of Brunswick, and that's absolutely not the case. Brunswick is a very dispersed, very set of distinct differences and characteristics that apply to the various neighbourhoods of Brunswick, and the neighbourhood that you've described this evening very much reflects one that has a heritage character, that has a character where you all know each other, and there is a neighbourhood character that prevails, and that's what we've sought to respond to with our neighbourhood residential zones. We want to continue to see that kind of activation in your precinct. Finally, I would note that the street frontage here, and whilst only one of the objectors did mention the heritage qualities, I do think that's played such an important role in my decision making this evening. There are some heritage pockets of Brunswick that we really do need to protect and defend, but street frontage and character is incredibly important, and we've seen so often that by having dark painted and walls abutting the street instead of actual activation and light and people's front doors and windows, that leads to feelings of unsafety. It leads to a lot less neighbourhood character and being able to watch what's going on in the street, and all of these things are really important when considering developments of this size. So there's a lot of factors playing into this, as well as the fact that I have been described as the cat lady councillor, so I certainly took into consideration that point as well, but not as much as all of the very salient planning points this evening. So thank you to all of the objectors. I'm sorry you've had such a difficult time of objecting to this application and that it has been going on for 12 years now, but hopefully we will start to see some improvements.
Thank you, Councillor Hoffman.
It
is on the screen. I'm not sure if you're able to view it. I rise to also speak in regards to the refusal at VCAT. I do think it is disturbing a little bit when you hear, as a decision maker, you hear plans being substituted constantly. It does make our role here tonight very difficult, and it does make the role of residents in being able to object and engage in that process very difficult. I do think that when the Minister made these changes to the zones, the Minister inserted provisional clauses because there would be an application or two that would rightfully be disadvantaged if they're almost at the end. And the zone was changed just at the last minute, but that needed to be afforded some provisional discretion to have the old zone considered. But I don't think this application falls in that zone. We've seen around that time a whole range of applications being submitted to council that were ill-prepared, ill thought out. They were just presented for a specific purpose to meet a deadline. And hearing what I'm hearing from the applicant and seeing all the amendments, I come to the conclusion that that's what's happening here. And I come to the conclusion that this is really a new application which should be judged on its merits in accordance with the new residential zones. And I think that is the major point that needs to be made at VCAT. It really isn't an application that was almost done and just needed a little bit more time. It really is an application that should not be considered under the old zone. So I think that's the first point. And if the applicant can take that back and work with the new zone, I think you would see an application that is significantly better, that does respect neighbourhood character. And the neighbourhood character, and I've walked down Harding Street many times, the neighbourhood character is single story. It really is. So the protections that are afforded in our neighbourhood residential zones will enable the developer to undertake a design and development which is sympathetic to the neighbourhood character, which is not an overdevelopment. So I think that is really what should occur on this site. The application as it sits now has significant problems in its design, from my perspective, in that it is completely different to what you see in the neighbourhood. And also on traffic as well. Those streets around there, Harding Street I'll mention again because it's got its little turn and it's a sharp bend, were not designed to accommodate those types of traffic movements and the types of densities that are being proposed. So yes, it is a large block, but just because it's a large block doesn't warrant where we fit as many apartments in there as we can. It needs to be sympathetic to the neighbourhood character and to the ability of the street to be able to absorb and take the extra additional traffic. And for the densities that are proposed, I don't think Harding Street or any of the surrounding streets can really take those traffic movements. So for a whole range of reasons, it is an unacceptable application. It should be rejected, and the applicant should work with the council and the community to put in a new set of plans, and those plans to be considered on their merits in accordance with the new planning scheme, which is really not new anymore. It's been in play for well over a year.
Thank you.
Sorry, in reading point 5 and point 6 having been added, I now note that point 6 contradicts point 5, and so I might amend the wording of point 6 to say, in the event that VCAT determine that transitional provisions do apply, the Urban Planning Committee. So take out the section that says whilst acknowledging that transitional provisions do apply, and say in the event that VCAT determines that transitional provisions do apply, and then the same continuing through.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Is that acceptable to the seconder? Councillor Kavanagh?
Can I ask a question of the manager first? Can I have your view on those 2 extra points, manager?
The one thing I've suggested to Councillor Tapanos is that the last sentence, which requires that the amended plans be considered a new application and be subject to notification. I don't believe that's within VCAT's powers to direct a new application. It can certainly reject the application.
Right.
I'm happy to remove that because I think it's redundant effectively. If the consideration is that it is transformational, then obviously a new application will need to be considered.
And with that removal, you're satisfied with it? Yeah. Can I speak on behalf of it?
Councillor Cavanagh.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on behalf of the recommendation. Firstly, can I congratulate the objectors for the way, first of all, you presented your information tonight, and also with the quality of the objections. Sometimes people think here that, if I have 300 objections, it's bound to be refused. It's actually not really about the number of objections, it's about the quality of those objections and what matters are being raised. And I thought tonight the objectors raised those extremely well thought out, and clearly embedded in their love of their streets that they live in. So congratulations on that. Look, I find this application a bit frustrating in that, like we started in 2004 with a 161 apartment application. We then went in 2006 to 146. We started 2016 with 75, and we heard that on Friday we're down to 62. It frustrates me because why are we trying to get the absolute most out of a piece of land without considering the people who are around that piece of land? Like, seriously, it frustrates me. I also think this zone, council is one of the very few wins that we've had in planning, to be honest, right? It's not for lack of trying. I've been on council since 2004, and we have tried and been knocked back, but this was a win, right? It wasn't a total win because we didn't get the mandatory block sizes that we wanted, but we got a lot. We had a pretty good win. So, I'm pretty protective of that because, when you're batting 1 out of 50, you want to protect the one that you've had a win on. And so, really, to be honest, when you've lost 49 others, you want to protect the one that you've had the win on. So what I'm saying basically is I understand that the process has allowed this to take place. I understand that legally it's correct, but morally I don't think it is. I really don't. And I hope the applicant can take that back to his client and let them know that, these are good people that you're wanting to put a development amongst, and you will get the support of the people around you if you work with those people, right? And if you do things properly. But if you don't, expect to have a fight, because they're entitled to have a fight, because they love their local area. And can I say also, sometimes, I know this will be decided in VCAT, so sometimes people think what happens around this table doesn't count. It does, because it means, if this is successful tonight, and it's looking like it will be, it means that council will march with the objectors as one in their voicing at VCAT, rather than against the objectors and with the applicant. So what happens around here tonight, it's not the end of the story, but it certainly is a key plank within the story. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers, councillors? No? In that case, no, sorry, we're passing the motion at this point.
If there's any reason why 2 stories at the interface, which isn't the policy.
No, thank you.
Councillor, we'll put the motion to the vote.
I'm happy to respond, if that makes it easier.
Please, just briefly.
Sure. Because this is a rejection, we're not going into that level of detail. We're saying up front that we reject it, but it is covered through the section that says the lack of articulation to the Stewart Street facade and the inconsistency with the streetscape. So it's covering the height. We didn't go into detail around it because the neighbourhood residential zone doesn't apply or was not considered to apply in light of the transitional provisions, but the additional points that we've added about the transitional provisions do speak to the height concerns that you have.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. I'll put Councillor Hopper's motion to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that carried. And I'll now pass
Can I have that noted that was unanimous?
Unanimous, yes. Thank you, Saskia. I'll now pass to the Planning Officer to outline the legal process from here.
The Urban Planning Committee has resolved that Council maintain its position that the application should be refused. Council's officers will therefore submit to VCAT that this application should be refused at the upcoming appeal hearing on the 26th of September based upon the grounds contained within the recommendation and subject to additional grounds points 5 and 6. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for those who attended this evening for this application. I'll just now give the gallery a chance to move out if they wish to do so, or for those who wish to stay, you're more than welcome to.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to DED 716 2 to 8 Barry Street, Brunswick. Planning permit application MPS 2015-1002. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, councillors. So the application at 2 to 8 Barry Street in Brunswick. On the screen we have an aerial photograph of the subject site, and that is hatched. It's within a mixed-use zone and has encompassed 2 laneways either side of the subject site. Behind the subject site we've got a larger 3 to 5 storey development that fronts Union Street, and we've got a series of single-storey houses and commercial properties that front onto Union Street. This site does have a history. A permit was issued by VCAT in 2005 for a 4-storey building containing 36 apartments, 2 basement levels and 60 car spaces. That proposal was subject to a number of mediation hearings before its approval, and those mediation hearings were successful as all parties mediated. That current planning permit is still valid. The top of the screen is the existing approved development, and down the bottom of the screen is the current proposal. The current proposal is for 21 townhouses arranged in 10 townhouses fronting Barry Street and 11 townhouses at the rear, with a space in the middle of 4 metres. Just quickly going through the plan, we have vehicle access through the laneway, providing access to 21 car spaces, or 1 car space for each dwelling. These dwellings obviously front Barry Street. And then as we move up, we have a gap in between the 2 townhouses of 4 metres, with an entry point on Barry Street here and an entry point on the other end of Barry Street, providing access. As we move up, you can see living areas on the 3rd level. And then the 4th level of the development facing Barry Street is the terraces or decks, living areas for the townhouses at the back. And then what we have is the roof of the townhouses fronting Barry Street. And at the back we've got a 5th level which contains a terraced area and what's mainly a glass structure that provides access to those terraces. They're just some more aerial images of the proposal as you would view it from Barry Street. The application was advertised and 13 objections were received. The grounds of the objections are on the screen. A planning information and discussion meeting was held on the 21st of July. It was attended by council officers, Mayor Ratnam, 1 objector, and the applicant's representatives were there. That planning information discussion meeting, there was a concern of the objector in relation to their view from the rear, from their property to the rear of the subject site, and they requested that there be creepers be added to the rear of that property to soften the appearance, and that forms a condition of the recommendation. It is recommended that a notice of decision to grant a planning permit be issued, subject to the conditions contained in the recommendation, and I'll just point out 2 that are of particular note. 1 is to include a lift for increased disabled access, and conditions 1F and 1C, which seeks to remove the east-facing planter boxes and have a setback from the roof form and include the creeper vegetation to improve the visual impact for the properties to the rear. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members from the gallery who wish to speak as an objector to this application? Yes, please come forward.
My name's Peter Bow. I live at 130 Union Street, right next door to a 120 apartment development in Union Street that probably at least two of the councillors here would know extremely well. First of all, I presume I'm really talking to the city development people. I feel sorry for the councillors. They depend on the city development people. And when I read some of these things, I don't understand or I don't know that they're factual. Our reference to our shops there, they're all commercial use. 3 out of those shops are owner-occupiers with very little commercial use going on. So the point I'd make to the city development people is hopefully they go down there and look at these things or don't rely on other points. My point to the planning officer there too, one of the objections that was listed clearly, because I did it, was the laneway at the back. And I'm very confused now if the laneway is going to be increased in size.
Sorry, I just would like to ask that you do speak through the chair, not to the officer.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
So that'd be one question I would like to have resolved. The other thing is, and this really goes to what's proposed, I fail to understand why a reduction of 11 required car parking spaces is appropriate. We have, is the proposed reduction of car parking acceptable? Up the top it says 32 car parking spaces are required. Then it comes down the bottom with something saying, well, it's okay. If the reduction of 11 car parking spaces is considered appropriate for the following reasons. There isn't one mention of the Union Hotel. There is not one mention of 120 apartments that are next door to this. I can clearly tell you, as a resident down there, from probably Thursday evening through to Sunday evening, there is very, very limited parking, extremely limited parking. And I'm sure that I've seen some of the councillors down there and I think they would appreciate that there's very limited parking there too. So that really concerns me because time and time again, this reduction of parking, Union Street and Barry Street is ridiculous for parking at the moment. We have the Temple Park at the back. There's a lot of mothers groups meet at the cafes and go there. So it is very serious. And the other point is, I would like the council to take that on board and consider it very seriously. I would like an answer to what is the laneway, because again, at VCAT, one of the mediation, the same thing was put forward to them. What is the laneway? The original plan, the laneway was going to be increased in size, and I don't know what it's going to be at this stage because it's not a very wide laneway. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there another objector who wishes to speak? Yes, please come forward.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. At the risk of making an enemy with the gentleman over here, I live in the apartments that he was mentioning, specifically the westward-facing apartments that are directly adjacent to this property. We went through this last year, as you all know, and my objection to the original plans were the same as this one. I don't have an objection to a development. I understand that it's a rather large site. I also understand the hypocrisy of living in a third-storey apartment development and opposing another apartment development. I'm not objecting to a development, but this particular plan will be putting a 4 and 5 storey wall directly in front of our property. All those apartments face west. All the light we get comes from the west. You place a 4 or 5 storey property, within stone's throw of our property, we're going to be in darkness the majority of the time. We'll basically have to have our lights on all day. And obviously that's going to be quite problematic for us. We do get good light, and when our only natural light source is cut off, it causes a bit of a concern. Down the track, of course, there's also the concern of property values. You put a big wall in front of our property, it's going to impact negatively on property values. We're a first home buyer, we'd like to stay living in Brunswick. We had, when we purchased this property a few years ago, we had plans of renovating it, and when we decide to settle down and have a family, we'd sell it and try and get ideally another property in Brunswick because we like the area, we love living here, but now we're kind of not sure how that's going to work if this ends up with monolith in front of within a stone's throw of our property. That's pretty much it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any further objectors who wish to speak? Yes, please come forward.
My name is Rebecca Bamforth, and I'm the person who took the opportunity to meet with the developers when the council organised the meeting, which was very beneficial. At that stage, I had also gone through the previous VCAT process with the other development that was proposed for the site. So in terms, I'd gone through the VCAT process with that, and we'd, as you say, that permit is actually still valid. And we managed to get some changes to that, but not as many as I would have liked, because that's actually my son Julian. He lives in the apartment that we own in Union Street, so we're related. So I did, as I say, that's the context that I did go through the other one. We made some changes to that. It was not ideal. When I spoke to the developers, I'd like either, it's a factory there at the moment. I'd ideally like a development, but not over so that it blocks out light and sunlight and access to our. But the reality is that we've got to make compromises. One of the things I suggested that developers hadn't taken on board was actually doing some sort of plantings to ameliorate the effect of a wall if it goes ahead. So I guess I am an objector, but I have been given the opportunity previously at the VCAT hearing with the other proposal and with the current developers to put some suggestions forward. So really that's where I stand on the. Again, we like nothing at all because our apartment looks out, we have a lovely vista over the rooftops and trees of Brunswick, which some of the other people have been talking about earlier on. But anyway, we'll leave it in your hands to decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further objectors? Is there a representative for the applicant present? Yes.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name's Luke Chamberlain. I'm a town planner from Tract Consultants at 195 Lennox Street in Richmond. I'll try and keep it short. The architect's also here tonight who'd like to address the council as well, if that's okay, only for a few minutes, because it's a development that we think is going to make a very positive contribution to Brunswick, and one that we think offers so much in the way of good design, use of materials and consideration for its context. The developer for this application is called Milieu. Milieu's been around now for a few years and has done most of its projects in the City of Yarra and also in the City of Melbourne. It's been very keen to find a site in Moreland for quite some time, and it was very pleased to come across this site. Milieu focuses on site responsive design as part of its MO, if you like. It also targets an owner-occupier market, and it likes to produce developments that are going to stand the test of time, and there's a real emphasis in quality and building things that people are happy to pay for. It engaged Fieldwork as its architect, who's very context-driven, thinks very carefully in its designs about how it might sit within the neighbourhoods. It considers very carefully what the materiality will be, and it wants to make a positive contribution to the urban fabric. The architect often tells me that they want to produce developments that are ones that they would choose to live in themselves, and that says a bit. Now, the council officers have been very helpful right along the process. We've had a pre-application meeting on a couple of occasions. We've been prepared to make changes. We know that it's a proposal a site that's been to the council before. We know it's in a mixed-use zone and it's in a substantial change area. So there's a lot of strategic justification for this type of development on the site. We say that it responds very sympathetically to its context. We were very pleased to meet with Ms Bamford at the consultation meeting last month. Unfortunately, Ms Bamford was one objector in about 6 of us, but she spoke very well and articulated her concerns very clearly to us, and we were more than happy, as we always are, to meet with objectors because it gives us an opportunity to hear firsthand what the real issues might be. We were more than happy to go away and think about a solution to the eastern interface, and that's going to be materialised through the conditions, and it's going to be a creeper up a structure against that eastern wall. Thank you very much for your consideration of the application. We ask very respectfully that you adopt the council officer's recommendation. I just want to say that we appreciate that all objectors have relevant things to say. In respect of this site, we've thought very carefully about that eastern interface, and there is some setbacks that have been applied and some stepping in of the development along there. We didn't just think about Barry Street. We wanted to make sure that what we were proposing at that interface was ultimately a reasonable outcome. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So the Arctic's here if you wish to hear from him.
Councillors? Yes, we're happy to hear from the architect.
Hello, how are you? I'll be very brief. Look, I'm going to hand out a couple of images because the one doesn't show up so well on the screen, but they're double-sided and you have a bit of a look at them. So my name is Keena Holland and I'm the Director of Fieldwork. We're an architecture practice. I've got to actually come clean with you a little bit as well. I have particular interest in this project because my house is about 150 metres from the site. For me, I feel a really deep sense of responsibility to make sure this is a positive development for the site. I've been fortunate to work on sites outside of Moreland, but this is the first one really in my neighbourhood. I think through no fault of anybody in the room, Brunswick has had some unfortunate developments which have had some detrimental impact on the urban fabric. I don't want to be too esoteric in saying this, but really this is my love letter to Brunswick. And by that, I mean that I have taken a lot of care and consideration in thinking about how I can design something that will, while it's a new building, sit comfortably within that context. So the materiality of the building has been thought about very carefully. We're stone's throw from the Brunswick brickworks. We've looked at traditional bricklaying techniques in the area. And what we're proposing is to do a predominantly brick building. And the idea really is to investigate some of those bricklaying techniques, so it does feel like it is born of its place. The setbacks, the sort of street frontage, are really also a homage to the Victorian terrace house typologies. So as you go from north to south along the frontage, you go from the single-fronted, single-storey with a veranda sort of setback, and we've mirrored that with that small white townhouse on the end there. All the way through to this sort of more like a Victorian shopfront type interface. So it really, that Barry Street frontage is really a modern interpretation of the classic Victorian typologies that you get along the streets in Brunswick. So my real desire with this is that if we're fortunate enough to get a permit, that we can actually deliver a project that can be pointed at as a positive development model. And also, I want to be able to walk my dog past. I've got a greyhound, and I walk it to the Temple Park to have a bit of a run around. And I want to be able to walk past this site and really feel proud of what we've done here. And like I said clearly, that it wants to be a new building, but one that people, when they sort of interact with it, do feel that it's been done in a very respectful sort of a way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions from councillors to the applicant or the officer?
One for the officer.
Yes, Councillor Kavanagh.
Can I just check the concern about the boundary? Am I correct that condition 1F deals with that?
That's correct.
Yeah. And we're satisfied that that minimises a little bit of the impact on that gentleman?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Are there any further questions from councillors?
To move the recommendation with the conditions as presented. Sorry, happy to move the recommendation. If I have a second, I'll speak to it.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kavanagh.
This is a great dovetail to the previous application. I think you've seen how council stood up and said that we object to a development in a residential zone and the overdevelopment in that particular location. When we went to the community a couple of years ago and invited those of us to give their understanding as to where we need to develop within the city of Moreland, we said we wouldn't do it in our backyards, but we would have to do it in some of those growth zones, and this is one of those ones, or the fringe of one of those. So these are the places and the locations that we've chosen, hence the development opposite the Union Hotel and along this particular street. And when you are then dealt the hand that we're giving here with an architect that lives locally and evidently a developer that is conscientious of what they're building, we end up with what looks to be, on paper at least, a pretty substantial looking development, and one that we would love to see right across the municipality. So whilst unfortunately it will have an impact on a couple of neighbours who are directly affected, as a community this is the sort of thing we're looking for, and this is the location that we're looking to have it undertaken. I can understand that as you're sitting there with your west-facing views, and now that we're about to approve a three-storey building, unfortunately these the limitations that we had in these particular areas. So I apologise to you, but I encourage this sort of development to continue in this particular population.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kavanagh?
Just briefly, yes, I do have concern for the objectors, and particularly the ones backing on to that side, but I do think the officers have conditioned it to a point where I think it is acceptable. I think it's also good, should be cognisant of the fact that there is a live permit for 36 apartments. Looking at the two, as we did at briefing last week, this does seem a superior application to that, and so you know, if we were to refuse it, then the other one would still be live and probably have a greater impact than what this one would. So I thank the applicant for explaining and particularly the architect for explaining the thoughts behind it as well, and so I'll be supporting this one.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Are there any further speakers?
Look, I'll speak fairly briefly, just to echo what Councillor Kavanagh has said, and you'll have heard me speak in the last section about appropriate versus inappropriate development in Brunswick. I do think this is a part of Brunswick where we could have seen so much more growth than this, and indeed it's exceptionally rare to get a circumstance where an application comes back to council where there is a permit live for almost double the number of dwellings on a site, and the applicant and its designer has conscientiously decided to reduce the number of dwellings on a site and make a better standard of larger development. I think that's incredibly rare, and for us as an urban planning committee to reject such an opportunity would, in my opinion, be folly. This is a better outcome for the site than the permit which is currently live. I certainly do great the concerns around light and you're facing to the immediate boundary, but I note that point F, as Councillor Kavanagh mentioned in his questions earlier, does seek to respond to that by requiring that dwelling 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and 20 east-facing rooftop planter boxes be removed and the roof form setback 5.5 metres from the eastern property to reduce the visual impact of the east elevation, and I hope that that goes some way towards assuaging your concerns. Overall, I think that this is a really positive outcome and a great improvement on the previous application.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Are there any further speakers?
I guess I'll speak briefly. I'm not sure if it's a great improvement. There is less to dwellings, but there is a bit more height. So in that sense, you know, I think some benefits are derived between one and the other, because I'm conscious of the traffic problems that have emerged in and around Union Street, particularly since the big development that some people in the gallery live at. And I think that is changing the area, and if we do see more and more dense developments up along Union Street, we would see that type of neighbourhood street sort of really change, will become more of a really busy road. So I don't want to see that. So I'm very pleased that it's got a significant reduction in the amount of dwellings. I think it's been as positive, but a bit disappointed to see that in order to accommodate that, there needed to be more growth, more heights. I think it would have been great if in this area it had stayed to within 4 at the maximum. It would have been better if it was a consistent 3 right across the site. And I think you could have probably achieved the same amount of dwellings regardless. In regards to the architectural design, I think the first one was a little bit more modern. This one probably blends in with the surrounding area and the history of Brunswick a little bit more. Must be said, aesthetically I probably prefer the first one, but I do see the merits of this one replacing a brick factory with something that sort of does reminisce a little bit about what was there, even though it's a completely new building. So I think the architect has done a really good job in that regard. Yeah, I didn't vote for the first one. If this was a brand new application without an existing life permit, I probably wouldn't support it. But making the assessment and judging between 2 applications, I'm happy to support this and say that this is a better application than the first one.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that carried. And I'll now pass to the officer to outline the legal process from here.
Thank you. So the Urban Planning Committee has resolved to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit in accordance with the conditions contained within the recommendation. So that notice of decision to grant a planning permit will be given to all the objectors. We'll have 21 days to appeal that decision to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. In the event that no appeal is lodged, then a planning permit will be issued, in which the applicant has 60 days to appeal any conditions of that planning permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to DED 7116, 718 to 722 Sydney Road, Coburg North, planning permit application MPS 2015-595, and I'll just give the gallery a chance to vacate.
Okay.
Oh, not just yet, sorry. Just give the officer a chance to go through that.
Oh, yeah, true. Sure.
Yeah.
This application pertains to 718 to 722 Sydney Road, Coburg North. In this instance, the officer's recommendation to the Urban Planning Committee is that a notice of decision to grant a planning permit should be issued subject to the conditions contained in page 90 of the agenda. Yes, application seeks approval for the use and development of the land for 2 6-storey buildings plus basement. It contains 140 dwellings. It seeks to remove vegetation and to alter access to a road zone, which is Sydney Road, and to reduce the car parking requirement associated with the shops. This site is located within the northern end of the activity centre and comprises 3,177 metres square. The site has a frontage to Sydney Road and backs onto Coburg Lake Reserve. The site's located within the activity centre zone, Schedule 1, Precinct 8. The activity centre zone identifies preferred heights and setbacks for this site, and it also identifies this site as being the preferred site to provide a pedestrian through link from Sydney Road to the park. A parking overlay, environmental significance overlay, erosion management overlay and developer contributions overlay also applies. Notice was carried out by council with signs erected on site and letters sent to surrounding properties. 4 objections were received and a planning information and discussion meeting was carried out by planning officers. Following the meeting, plans were amended by the applicant and the grounds of objection largely relate to height, setbacks, car parking, traffic, noise and amenity and the impact upon the park. So the application proposes 2 6-storey buildings with an overall maximum height of 18.5 metres, and it sets back from Sydney Road at the 3rd floor. So what's before us now is the ground floor plan. Central to the building is a communal courtyard of 515 square metres, and it provides building separation of between 9 and 14.6 metres as the building increases. There are 140 dwellings, 51 bedroom, 89 two-bedroom and 1 3-bedroom, and there are 4 retail spaces, so 2 larger spaces along the Sydney Road frontage and then 2 on the southern side of the site. The application proposes a through link of approximately 405 metres square, which connects Sydney Road to the park. It's on the southern side of the site, and it's where that large sort of tree is proposed. And this space is activated through the lobbies and through 2 additional retail spaces. There's also 3 levels of basement and 165 car parks and 100 bicycle spaces. This through link leads to a stair at the rear of the site. The stair accommodates for the steep incline in the land where it adjoins the reserve and provides a purpose for that connection. So you walk through from Sydney Road, through that public link, and then down the stair, which will also remain publicly accessible. There is an officer recommendation in this instance to adjust conditions 41 and 42 of the recommendation. The alteration in condition 41 relates to further specifications and materials to council satisfaction, and the alteration in condition 42 alters some of the timeframes around maintenance and liability with handover of that stair. This is the other elevation where the through link passes by. Oh, sorry. Apologies. This is the Sydney Road frontage, which in perspective, I don't know what's happening. Which in perspective looks like this. This is the rear of the site, which adjoins and faces the park. And this is the stair that's mentioned before, which sits within the parkland. And this is a perspective from the park. There are particular conditions pertained within the recommendation that seek to increase the setback from the south, require additional storage. There are legal agreements around access and maintenance and liability around the stair and the link. And the officer recommendation is that the application be supported subject to these conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the gallery who wish to object? Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's David Gold. I'm from Sharp Line Stainless Steel. We're the industrial occupier to the south of this site at 700 Sydney Road. My clients support the recommendation, but with some qualifications, and I'll just very quickly address those. Sharpline is a major manufacturer of stainless steel products. They sell hospitality, hospital, retail fit out, all sorts of stainless steel products across Australia and overseas. They employ 40 people on this site, and then there are a whole lot of other people that are employed in related industries. So they're a genuine local business that's been in the area for 34 years, and they want to stay there. So their concerns are really about ensuring that they can stay there without reverse amenity impacts from the development next door. So the first issue that they have is how to coexist from the noise perspective. In our objection, we highlighted that we will have a large number of dwellings immediately adjacent to our loading area and to our manufacturing areas, and we need the flexibility to have trucks coming and going at all hours and so on. We can't afford to adjust our operations to suit a more sensitive residential use that gets introduced to the site. We note that there's a condition 18 in the recommendation that calls for an acoustic assessment. Our concern simply with that is that we believe it isn't strong enough on 2 points. The first is that it needs to say that the residential uses need to be protected from the tram, road, traffic and industrial noise, and I'll go through that a little bit more. And the second is that it needs to be very clear that the attenuation measures are to be undertaken by the permit holder at their cost. So at the moment the wording's a bit loose. I appreciate the intent behind it, but I have a suggestion that I've come up with sitting here listening to the other matters, which I would hope would assist the council. So if I can take you to that wording of condition 18, it says prior to the commencement of the development approved by this permit, a report prepared by a qualified acoustic engineer must be submitted to the satisfaction of the responsible authority, outlining specific noise attenuation measures to minimise the, and then I'm suggesting insert some words, impact on the residential uses. So minimise the impact on the residential uses of, continues, noise from the adjacent arterial road and tram route and neighbouring industrial land uses, and that's fine. And then the second part, construction and maintenance of the, instead of buildings, we believe it should say attenuation measures. So this condition's calling for a report to identify attenuation measures, and that is what must be constructed and maintained. So construction and maintenance of the attenuation measures. And then it continues, must be, and then includes some words, undertaken at the cost of the permit holder. So must be undertaken at the cost of the permit holder and be in accordance with the recommendations. So what that does in effect is it firms up exactly who is likely to be impacted, being the residential users, and it makes it clear that those measures are to be implemented at the permit applicant's responsibility. So that was the first point. And our second point, which with the car parking, we of course have to defer to Council's assessment of parking requirements. I think we made quite clear what our concerns were there in our objection. We know there's a shortage of parking in the area, and an intense development like this needs to cater for its parking on site. That's the bottom line. So it's really a matter of a judgment, which we've got our opinion, and it's for you to take your advice on that. The third point relates to equitable development. In the longer term, if our client is going to relocate, which may of course happen in time, we want to be reassured that the setbacks from our common boundary are sufficient so that the setbacks are shared between both this development and our client's land. We note and agree with the recommendation in 1A, which is calling for changes to the setbacks from the southern boundary. But our concern there simply is that the dimensions that have been stated in there are reliant on guidelines that, as I understand it, don't currently have statutory effect. So in the absence of those guidelines having statutory effect, normally there would be a 4.5 metre setback rather than a 3 metre setback required between adjacent developments from the second floor upwards. So our view would be that if the guidelines that Council is referring to would equally apply to our client's land in the future, then that's fine. But if it's likely that the setback requirements would be more closer to 9 metres total, which is 4.5 metres each, then the wording of 1A should be setback levels 1 to 2, a minimum 3 metres, and then the rest of the building should be set back 4.5 metres from the boundary. So that's it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. And as I said, that's a conditional concern that we've raised, but otherwise we are supportive of the development.
Thank you. Thank you for raising those. Are there any further objectors?
Nick Dolby, West Brunswick. I know of artists who have purchased from Sharpline, purchased work for their art. I support the existence of that industrial site and would certainly agree with the responsibility of the developers to attenuate any noise emitting from that site, as they are, just as with hotels and so on, they are first users of the site. I'm here to express regret that the chance to develop the bike path adjacent to the site has not been taken. It would have been nice if there was a bit of synchronicity going on between the developers of those sites and improving that particular section of the Merri Creek bike path. I do, however, note with a strong approval the pedestrian access and the what formerly was known as a Chinese ramp, but a bike push ramp is fine as well on the staircases. I think that's a very strong thing, though I would like to see any landscaping done along that link to be in keeping with the landscaping of the adjacent park, not separated in species and so on, if preferable, in fact, indigenous plantings along that interface. That's what I've got to say.
Thank you. Are there any further objectors? Right. Is there a representative for the applicant present? Yes, please come forward.
Thanks for this opportunity. My name's Ben Sagami from Planning Studio on Peel. I'll just respond to the objectors' concerns. The acoustic language is something that we'd probably need to more fully understand. There was a few changes to the language there. So if we have the opportunity to discuss that after I speak, that would be good. In regards to the setbacks that were written into the conditions, we are fully accepting of this at that point. We understand that they've emerged from the Apartment Design Code, and that even though the Minister rejected that he didn't fully reject it, it remains a seriously entertained document. So we would understand that that would then apply to any future development on the neighbouring land. I guess I'd also like to echo what Megan talked about in terms of the site itself. It's at the northern gateway to Moreland, which is itself the gateway in terms of an inner city suburb to Melbourne itself. This is right at the peak of the activity centre zone. So we've considered it a very important site to build upon, and we see it as a bit of a catalyst in terms of this micro neighbourhood here. And the public pathway, which has just disappeared from the screen, has always been at the centre of this development, and how to get that to work appropriately, not only for the residents, but obviously the future residents, but the existing residents, and how to encourage them to use this, because it's been an unknown, it's been an industrial, somewhat of an eyesore for a long period of time. So how to demonstrate to the surrounding community that this is now a public place for gathering and a through route to the park to get this park fully utilised as it should be. So thank you again, and if there's any further questions we can answer, myself and the architect are here to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions from councillors for the applicant or the officers?
I had a question in relation to the soundproofing and the noise. I mean, in the report, obviously, we ask for a noise report to be produced, but what kind of protections are there for existing industrial use? I mean, I know for live music venues, for example, there's the agent of change laws. Does something similar apply in the use of an industrial land that's already there? I mean, we've seen a lot of examples previously of people complaining to council about noise in an industrial property when it had been there, preceding them purchasing. So,
thank you. So within the activity centre zone, there is sort of an expectation that it is transitional in a way, and so there are provisions built into about how managing those requirements in that time when it does change over, you know, whether it be a short term or a number of years. Hence why we have required this condition in the report, and we would seek, in terms of how that is resolved, whether it be through glazing different materials, whatever, we would seek the expert opinion of the noise engineer in that instance, or acoustic engineer in that instance.
okay. And so the property that's currently manufacturing, is that zoned industrial or is it zoned mixed use?
That's also in the activity centre zone.
In the activity?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So the amendment, this is to the applicant, the amendment indicated that once that came through, that any of those acoustic noise cancelling, thicker windows, whatever the suggestion may be, would be upon yourselves to undertake and deliver based on that report. Is that something that you could, you know, effectively say, yes, we'd be happy to do so, and we could add that to the, yep, as a condition? The other one, which was to do with the distance, I think it's answered, so I don't think it becomes a bit tricky, that one. And as for the trees, like Mr.
Ask a question to the officer. I can't find exactly how many dwellings are proposed. It says, do we have an exact figure of the amount of dwellings?
It's 140 dwellings.
Yeah.
So it's 51 bedroom, 89 2 bedroom, and 1 3 bedroom.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Can I ask the applicant a question? I recall this coming to council a number of years ago on a previous. Were you involved in that application?
Not myself.
No. And I've got a feeling it was around the 50 apartment mark. 50. I'm trying to find whether it says history. I reckon it was about 8 years ago, I reckon.
Yeah.
54 dwellings. There we go. Okay. So we're going from, if this was to be approved, we're going from 56 dwellings to 146?
Yes, and I guess that's along with the recognition that this is now an activity.
Yeah, that's right. It was prior to that being endorsed. That's true. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from councillors? Is there a motion a councillor wishes to move in relation to this application?
I want to move an alternative recommendation.
Councillor Coburg.
All right. Firstly, regarding point 18, to include, as the objector outlined, so point 18, after the word, in the fourth line, after measures to minimise the, after the word the, impact on the residential uses of, point 18. It's a long way down, yeah. Yeah. So after the word measures, which begins the fourth line, okay, sorry, measures to minimise the, and then impact on the residential uses of,
Sorry, it should say impact on the residential uses. That's very important.
Yes, impact on the residential uses of the, and then noise from. Okay, so it stays as it is there. Then down to after construction and maintenance of. Okay. Delete buildings and change that to attenuation measures. And then must be stays where it is. After must be undertaken at the cost of the permit holder and be. Okay. Now that's that, and then I want to add.
I don't think she's got that last
Okay. Construction and maintenance of the, sorry, construction and maintenance.
Undertaken.
Undertaken, yes, sorry, it must be undertaken at the cost of the permit holder and be, and the rest knows it is, and be. B as in BE, sorry. BE, B, yeah, and B. Yep, that's it. Perfect. That's fair enough. No worries. And if I can then go to, I have another additional point. 1R. This is obviously more substantive. The deletion of level 5s from both buildings to create 2 5-storey buildings, because currently it exceeds the height restriction. And, I'm just explaining that, and if I have a second, I'll speak to it. But currently, it's exceeding the height restriction, and I wanted to go back into the correct height restriction.
Thank you, Councillor
If
Kavanagh.
I have a
Is there
second, I'll speak to it.
Oh, I'll second it.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper.
Can I just ask a question, Councillor Kavanagh? In removing those levels, do you know the impact on dwellings, whether the dwellings will decrease and by how much?
Okay.
If you have that information.
I did last week, I wrote it down somewhere, but I neglected where I'd written that piece of information. Just to explain, the reason why this has come to the Urban Planning Committee is because it does exceed the height limits. It's the fact that there are 4 objections does not trigger it to be decided by the Urban Planning Committee. The fact that it exceeds the height restrictions in an activity zone is why it's here. You want to help me out with that, Mr. Priest?
Not there. The possible
Number of dwellings.
21.
On the top story. I thought it was 25.
Story dwellings at the top story?
Yeah, there are
Is
some
the
story.
applicant able to shed any light on this? And are you?
So we've got the
First
plan on
21.
there.
Is it
11
21?
would be that plan.
I think it's 20. We think it's 21 dwellings on that top level.
So that will take it down to 125 dwellings, which is still a major increase from what they currently have as a permit.
17.
All right, so yeah, well, obviously I've moved it, so I'm comfortable with that. But really, other than that, I think I think there's a lot of good things about this application. I really do. I think it's it could be a real cornerstone, as the applicant said. But I don't want to give applicants the idea that they can increase above what has been gazetted as our activity centre.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Hopper.
Not a great deal to add, just to echo Councillor Kavanagh's sentiments that overall we're very happy to see development on this site, and as far as I'm concerned, the sooner the better we get to work on this. But yes, the height controls are very important to us in this area as well as throughout Coburg, and so for me it is important that that level be reduced. I also do want to see, we've recently gone through the Moreland industrial land scheme, and while I appreciate that the property in this case is not located within an industrial zone, it is important that we continue to support the industrial uses that we have in Moreland and job creation that leads to. We want to see more people working and living in Moreland, and so I'm eager to ensure that the noise attenuation concerns are responded to in a way that responds to the fact that there is existing industrial use neighbouring you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Are there any further speakers from councillors? No? In that case, I'll put Councillor Kavanagh's amendment to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that all those against? I declare that carried. And we'll now pass to the Planning Officer to outline the legal process from here.
Thank you, councillors. The Urban Planning Committee has resolved to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to the conditions listed within page 90 of the agenda, with additional condition marked 1R and an amended condition 18. A notice of decision will be issued by council shortly after this meeting. Objectors will have 21 days in which an appeal can be lodged against this decision. If no appeal is lodged, a permit will be issued. Similarly, the objector has 60 days in which an appeal can be lodged against conditions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now move on to DD 7216, Pentridge Boulevard and Urquhart Street. Request for an extension to the planning permit application 2011 0128378A.
Upset.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. This matter is for a request for an extension to planning permit number 2011/12837A. This planning permit relates to land known as 22, 24 to 26, 28, 30 Pentridge Boulevard and also 27, 29 and 31 Urquhart Street. The history is that this permit was issued by the Minister for Planning in 2012. This matter was reported to the Urban Planning Committee in April 2016. The Urban Planning Committee resolved that an extension should not be granted to the permit, as the permit cannot be acted on as intended because council owns land at 29 and 31 Urquhart Street. The proposal fails to meet aspects of the Moreland Apartment Design Code, and the permit proposes a two-storey car park interface to Urquhart Street. The applicant has sought a review of this matter at BCAT. I also note that the Act does not require public notice or advertising of a request to extend the permit. So the report outlines a proposed consent agreement which the applicant has proposed, and this entails the removal of council land from the permit, which is shown with those stars on the aerial image on the screen. The agreement would also ensure compliance with the Moreland Apartment Design Code so that building separation distances comply between council land and the development site, and would remove a two-storey car park to Urquhart Street. The recommendation in the agenda is that the Urban Planning Committee resolve to support an extension to the planning permit by a consented agreement, which would require the execution of a Section 173 agreement to remove council land from that planning permit, and that development at the development site complies with the building separation distances in the Moreland Apartment Design Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, because there was no public notification in relation to this, I just will ask if there's anybody who wishes to speak. No? Okay. Are there any comments from councillors or a motion from councillors in relation to this?
Can I ask a quick question? And I concede I wasn't at the briefing. So my understanding of the report is that the applicant is proposing to remove entirely the 16-storey building, so the highest within this would now be 13 stories?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments from councillors? No? Is there a motion a councillor wishes to move in relation to this?
I'm happy to support the motion.
Do you wish to move it?
I'm happy to move the motion as presented on
Councillor
page.
Thompson?
And if I have a seconder, I probably won't speak to it.
Is there a seconder?
You're moving the report?
Yes.
Not the alternative?
No, unless you want for a second, you can let it lapse.
Ooh.
I'm happy to foreshadow if there's no second at the alternative.
I'm going to second it. I want to hear the debate.
Oh.
Seconded by Councillor Hopper. Councillor Thompson, do you wish to speak?
My reasoning behind giving them the extension of time is purely the fact that this is a portion of land that we would like to see moving forward, and putting the brakes on any of these particular motions only exacerbates the issue. Whilst there obviously is concern up and down as to what is actually going to happen in this particular quadrant, this is not going to make anything happen on the portion of land that we're looking at. And I feel that that extension of time, understanding that we've got new owners, and understanding that we're trying to work with them, and understanding that we recently put forward a motion that said that we would go out to work them, and the response immediately from this particular developer was, yes, we would like to talk to you, unlike perhaps the other one who was a bit exacerbated. I feel that we should be at least giving them every opportunity to move forward, and I feel that continuing to delay this and leave this dirty scar at the corner of Moreland will just continue to be there, and I don't think this is going to continue to help us.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hopper?
Yeah, look, I'll explain my reasoning here. The impact of this would be to remove the highest building in the application. And at 16 stories, that is the only building in the entirety of the application that does not now meet the amended Coburg structure plan, which the Minister approved approximately a year ago. 13 stories is within the approval that he gave, and that's discretionary heights. So, in fact, to have the applicant agree to remove a 16-storey building is a win for council, and to go down now to a maximum of 13 stories is within what they would have approved at VCAT, if not higher. So for me, I'm sometimes willing to accept these small wins in the constant battle that we have at Pentridge, and to note that in this case the developer is trying to respond to the concerns that we've raised. It doesn't fully respond to my concerns. I still think 13 stories is too high. I'd much prefer to see anything in Coburg below 10 stories, which is what we put to the Minister, and which was within our version of the Coburg structure plan. But in weighing up what was approved instead of what we put, and what likely outcomes we would receive at VCAT, then I think an agreement by the applicant to cap this building at 13 stories is actually a positive thing for council and for residents in Coburg.
Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Are there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Tappanos?
I'll move, I'll foreshadow the alternative to reject, and I'll speak against the motion. And look, this isn't the most complex parcel of land in the Pentridge precinct. It's not one that is immediately adjacent to a lot of historical infrastructure. It is not one that is, it's actually, the ground is a bit lowered, so some additional height there will not have the visual bulk and impact, particularly from Sydney Road, as some of the previous ones would. But I do believe that whatever the stories were that were claimed in the previous permit were probably never really tested economically, and probably was something that was never going to be financed. And I'm not even sure if 13 stories will be financed in this precinct. But as a general principle, I think that the council has requested a review of both the master plans with community consultation as part of that review. And I think the right thing for council to do in that regard will be to say, well, no, I'm sorry, pause, let's wait and see what is actually going to come from that review, if anything, before we actually start reissuing the permits. So on that principle, I'm foreshadowing that motion, because I do think that you might find with the community consultation that completely different designs or something completely different is proposed for this site. And it would be right to wait until that process is concluded before starting to grant extensions of time for permits that were issued by a minister that probably had, I remember the minister saying this is statewide significance and this must be done now and must be taken out of the community's hands, taken out of the council's hands, because we need to get this done now to stimulate the economy 8 years ago. And here we are, and nothing's happened. And I actually don't believe that this development is ready to go, even if we approve the extension tonight. So I think let's wait and see what the review would produce before we continue.
Thank you, Councillor Tappanos. Are there any further speakers? No? I'll put Councillor Thompson's motion to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that lost, and we'll now move to Councillor Tappanos's foreshadowed motion.
Okay, well, I'll foreshadow the motion as listed in the alternative.
I move it be put.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Kavanagh, and Councillor Thompson's moved that it be put. All those in favour?
Let it be put. Let it be put.
I'm happy not to speak, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favour that it be put? I declare that carried. Now we'll put Councillor Tappanos's... Oh, no. Councillor Tappanos's motion to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that carried. And we'll now pass to the Planning Officer to outline the legal process from here.
Thank you. The Open Planning Committee has resolved that it does not consent to the agreement and an extension of time to the permit. This matter is listed for a VCAT hearing to commence on the 19th of October.
Thank you. And I now declare the Urban Planning Committee meeting closed. Thank you for attending.